I'm live. Go ahead and hit that like button as you if you come in. Also, leave a comment if you're coming in, and if you're watching this on archive, as many of you do, make sure to leave a comment below, subscribe, and hit the alerts if you are not, and also hit that like button. Just wanted to come on real quick today and talk about a couple news topics at the top, and then the 147-pound division for the most part, because 147 is interesting for me. Just looking at the landscape. It's an interesting landscape at 147 that I think will lead to frustration for a lot of boxing fans if I'm reading this correctly as I look at the landscape. I think it'll lead to a lot of what we've had at 147 over the past couple of years with the PBC, with talented fighters at 147 necessarily not fighting each other. And unfortunately, I think we'll get more of that. Now, one topic I wanted to hit on real quick, one news topic I just saw is Jaime Munguia is looking like he's going to fight on June 11th in Anaheim against Jimmy Kelly. Jimmy Kelly. That's right. That's what we get from Munguia. Now, as I tweeted out earlier, if we're going to criticize Tank Davis for not fighting top competition, we need to do the same thing for other fighters. And Munguia is fighting a guy in Jimmy Kelly who is right around number 20 in the division. And that's right where Raleigh is at 135, right around number 20. So we need to be consistent. And if I'm criticizing Tank, I also need to criticize Munguia for fighting a Jimmy Kelly. It's just not acceptable for me. And I'll touch on that more in a minute. And I'll do a separate video on that tomorrow because I have a lot to say on it. Now, Nando did bring up an interesting point on Twitter, and shout out OJ22 in the comment section. And make sure to leave a comment as you come in. And like I said, if you're watching this in the archive, make sure to like and hit that sub button. But if we push for activity, if guys aren't getting the top fighters, then we can't really be upset because Munguia did fight in December, fought in February, and he's fighting again in June. All that is great. All of that is great. And I applaud that. Applaud that if I'm being consistent. As I've said, if you can't get the top fights, then do one of two things. Move up a division or two in order to get top guys in the ring with you, or just stay active and mow down inferior opposition and look good doing it. Give us highlight real KOs, stay in people's faces. So Munguia and his team have that down. The issue with this though is I don't see Munguia as an avoided fighter. I don't. Like a Golovkin, like a Paul Williams was, like a Boots Ennis is at 147. I don't think he's one of those avoided guys. I just don't. I think there are guys somewhere in the lower end of the top 10, maybe right outside of it, who would love to fight Jaime Munguia if given the opportunity. So that's my issue with this is I think Munguia, although staying active, although his team giving us activity, giving us Munguia fights every 3-4 months, and even 2 months in some cases, and I applaud that. Once again, I applaud the activity. I would like to see Munguia fight higher opposition, and I think it's available to him. And that's my criticism of it. So that's why I say if I'm on here criticizing Tank Davis for fighting number 20 to 25 in the division in Raleigh, I have to be critical of Munguia. Now, once again, there are differences there. The difference is this fight isn't on pay-per-view like Tank's is. Also, we'll likely see Munguia again 3 months later. We don't know when we'll see Tank again. We'll likely only see him fight twice in the year. So key differences there, but also some likeness as well. So I need to see more from Munguia, and I'll touch on this more tomorrow. Now let's get into this. Shout out to Kano Prophet. Shout out Ralph Sevilla. Do I think Pacquiao is returning? I don't know. I've seen this movie before where a guy retires from boxing, has a plan in mind, and the plan doesn't work out how they like, so they return. And that's the only reason I bring this up. And it also fits the topic of this video, which is the 147 pound division. And it's ironic that G-Funky just comes in here because G Funky is the guy who coined the term dumpster juice division with 147. And this is the reason I bring this video up is when I see the landscape at 147, it has two things in common with the 147-pound division. In my mind, from the division we've seen in the PBC heavy days of the 147-pound division. One is it's a talent-rich division. You look from 1 to 10 and 147, man, there's a ton of talent there. But two, I think the other common denominator, the other likely likeness of 147 today and 147, say 5 to 7 years ago, is I think it's setting up a reality in the division where if you look at the landscape, I think a lot of these guys are going to do a lot of avoiding of each other. I think that's what this landscape sets up. And I'll go into that more in a minute. Now, first, how many will give Fear's undefeated black fighters? I don't think that's the case. And I'm going to touch more on Munguia tomorrow because I have a lot of thoughts on that. But do I think Pacquiao is returning? I don't know. I think it would be 50-50 because Pacquiao can make a lot more money returning. A lot of us would like to see Pacquiao returning. As a Pacquiao fan, I would like to see him ride off into the sunset, enjoy his retirement. He's already had a great career, one of the greatest, if not the greatest of our generation, all-time great. So he's got all that going for him. But when I look at 147, and this is the reason I bring it up, and I want to talk more on Thurman than Pacquiao, is 147, one thing is lacking is a big name gatekeeper opponent. A guy who has already forged his career. He's earned his name, but he's on the back nine of his career. And these guys are failing to offer their services to the boxing public. And a key service that the boxing public needs is it needs quality gatekeeper opponents with names for younger talent coming up to feed off of, to clout chase off of. And by the way, this isn't all one-sided. This isn't a one-way street. The gatekeeper opponent, late in his career, with a name, who had a lot of success on the front end of their career, who not so much on the back end, but has a name, can benefit off of this financially. Keith Thurman can make a lot of money fighting a Boots Ennis, a Virgil Ortiz, a Stanionis, a Conor Benn. But will Keith Thurman do it? Chauncey Pearl's in the building. Once Upon a Time Thurman. That's a better nickname for him. Once Upon a Time Thurman. No longer One Time Thurman because when's the last time he had a KO? And there's two layers to this. Number one, when I look at the landscape at 147 from 1 to 10, the one question I ask myself is why is Keith Thurman in the top 10? And I see him in every top publication. This isn't just fans coming up with top 10 lists. In every major publication, I see Keith Thurman in the top 10 at 147, and I ask myself, why? Why is he there? Fought 3 times in the past 5 years. Hasn't had a meaningful win at welterweight since the Obama administration. One of the questions I ask the Keith Thurman fans is, what significant victory has Keith had that was like deliberate, like was a definite victory? Because I had Sean Porter beating him when they fought. So that fight was in question, right? So he's had 2, you would say, significant victories at 147, but he hasn't had them since, like I said, the Obama administration, 2016. So early 2017-ish. But in the past 5 years, what has happened to Keith? He's fought 3 times. He's only fought one, you would say, legitimate welterweight, Manny Pacquiao, and he lost the fight. He just beat Matteo Barrios, but Matteo Barrios was coming off of a loss, not even a top 10 guy at 140. So in order for you to be in the top 10 in your rankings in your division, you should have quality, meaningful fights in your division. And Keith hasn't had that in 5+ years. So how does he end up in the top 10? And I'm told by people all the time that the eye test matters, right? So does Keith Thurman pass the eye test more than a Boots Ennis? Does he pass it more than a Virgil Ortiz? Does he pass it more than Stanionis? Does he pass it more than Conor Benn? Does he pass it more than Butayev? Does he pass it more than Cody Crowley? When you watch those guys fight and you watch Keith Thurman fight Matteo Barrios, do you come out saying Keith Thurman's a better fighter than those guys? And there are two ways that we rate fighters over here in the Calix household. There are two ways to look at who a fighter really is. One, how does his handlers handle him? And two, how do his peers in and around the weight class react to him when his name is brought up? They've been treating his handlers, Keith Thurman, very fragile the past 5 years. One. Two, when Keith Thurman's name is brought up to Boots Ennis, Virgil Ortiz, Conor Benn, all those guys start to salivate. They look at Keith Thurman like fish food. Conor Benn wants that fight. He's screaming from the mountaintops, as do these other guys I mentioned. Stanionis would jump at that opportunity. They would love it. In order to keep that top 10 rank, you have to be active in your division. One, Keith hasn't had that. And two, he's not passing the eye test. And three, there are other credible names coming up with talent that don't have the names on their resume yet. They don't. I grant you that. But they pass the eye test more than Keith Thurman does, in my opinion. So how is he top 10 right now at welterweight? And at some point, you have to ask him to earn that rank. And one way to earn that rank is to fight other guys in the top 10. And if we're being realistic, he's not getting Crawford and Spence. And let's talk about the landscape right here. Crawford and Spence are going to be busy with each other for a while, right? 1 and 2. If they do what they're supposed to do, if there are no obstacles. What's going to happen is if these guys come to a deal, there's going to be a rematch clause involved on both sides. So realistically, we're looking at Crawford and Spence being busy with each other for the next 2 calendar years. Late 2022, likely into mid or spring or fall 2023. Those guys are busy at the top 2. They're fighting for welterweight supremacy, and they have earned that. They got the belts. They've got the major belts. You look at number 3, Ugas has a name. So that's a guy that these younger guys can clout chase off of. But if you look at 4 through 10 in the division, as far as my rankings would go, it's all young, up-and-coming, talented fighters. And this gets to my ultimate point is there's no real gatekeeper opponent in the top 10 of the division. And if you look at, let's say, ESPN's rankings, Keith Thurman's in there. He would be the only guy with a name who could offer gatekeeper services to these younger fighters. And he needs to offer those services. I don't want to hear anything about Tank Davis versus Keith Thurman in some sort of catchweight fight. I want to see Tank Davis fight the top fighters at 135. That's what I want to see. Fight the top fighters at 135. I don't need you in some sort of catchweight bout with a has-been at 147. No. He needs to offer gatekeeper services to the top 10 guys, young guys at 147. That's what I want to see. And I want to see Tank fight at 135. I also don't want to see Keith Thurman move up to 154 because Keith Thurman's not even fighting 147 pounders. And you want him to move up to 154? He just fought a guy who was a 140 pounder who is not top 10 at 140 coming off of a loss. And you want him to move to 154? Another bad idea. Offer your services to not only the young, talented fighters at 147, and by the way, get paid handsomely at the same time, but also offer these important services to the boxing fans who want to see it. We need a measuring stick at 147 if the young fighters aren't going to fight each other. And I would love to see the young fighters fight each other. I would love to see Virgil Ortiz versus Boots Ennis. I'd love to see Stanionis versus Boots Ennis. We just saw Stanionis versus Butayev. I would love to see more fights like that. I'd love to see Conor Benn against a Cody Crowley or any of those names, interchange them and fight each other. But realistically, we're not looking at that. And that's why I bring up the point that if you look at the landscape, it's a troubling landscape in that it's super talented, super young, talent-rich division, but it sets itself up for what we've been seeing at welterweight for a while is guys sort of avoiding each other. And I don't want to see that. But what I like to see is these measuring sticks come along in the process where Keith Thurman fights, where possibly a Manny Pacquiao comes out of retirement and offers glorified gatekeeper um, services to a Boots Ennis or a Conor Benn, something like that. I mean, just imagine a Conor Benn versus Manny Pacquiao over in the UK. How huge that would be. Imagine that. You saw how big Pacquiao, the Pacquiao fight was in Australia. Imagine it in the UK. Still a big name. And I'm not advocating for Pacquiao to come out of retirement. All I'm saying is Pacquiao just lost his presidential bid, came in a distant third, and now he may have some time on his hands. And if he does, a return to boxing is possible. And he fits right in well in the division. He would be a tough out for these young fighters. And it would be a big name to clout chase off of. Whether he comes out and risks his legacy or not, that's the question. But Thurman, a Pacquiao, and Adrian Broner even coming back. We've heard talks of Conor Benn versus Adrian Broner. No matter what we think about Adrian Broner being overrated, overvalued, he still would be a top 20 guy in the welterweight division with a name. So he could offer gatekeeper services for a Conor Benn, for a Virgil Ortiz, for a Boots Ennis. But we need guys like that. And if we look at this division, it's lacking. And welterweight has always been that division that gives us a little bit of everything, right? Because it's right smack dab in the middle of the boxing landscape from minimum weight all the way up to heavyweight. And it gives you a good mixture of talent, knockouts, skill, quickness, speed. And it also gives you a nice mix of names of different points in their careers, young talent coming up, big names in their prime, Pacquiao, Mayweather. And then you have now Crawford, Spence. So we have that stuff. We have the young talent. We have the top two dogs. But what we're lacking that we've had in the welterweight division in the past is big names to clout chase off of in the back nine of their career. And Thurman benefited from that. Broner benefited from that. Pacquiao even benefited from that early on in their careers. And these young guys aren't benefiting from that because these gatekeeper guys are not there right now. Crazy to think Spence came back from a near life-ending accident and a possible career-ending injury. Looked fantastic versus Ugas, and Keith can't seem to get it together with his injuries and beat a legit guy. And shout out Chauncey Pearls, man. I appreciate the super chat. Definitely appreciate that. And as far as Spence is sitting in a nice spot right now. And yeah, the car accident was unfortunate. The eye injury was unfortunate. It's all part of it, though, is the great fighters seem to stay consistent. They do the right things in between training camps. So Spence took a little of a detour there, right, for a while. But Spence is definitely back on the right track with that win against Ugas. I was super impressed. And I was on a panel, I think on D-Styles channel, where guys didn't seem as impressed with Spence in that fight as I was. I was impressed with Spence. I was impressed with how he took the fight to Ugas. I was impressed with the body work, taking his legs away. I was impressed with how he took the jab away. And I was impressed at how he got hurt and then came back from getting hurt and then stopped Ugas. Ugas is a good fighter, man. Ugas is a legit number 3 in the division. I still have him number 3. And Ugas is going to be an interesting name in the division because guys are going to want to clout chase off of him as well. But he's not a gatekeeper. He's still a guy in his prime, just coming off of a tough loss against a top fighter. And the top two guys have identified themselves in the division. That's Spence and Crawford. Right? And then Ugas a distant third right now. And then you got the young talent coming up. But what I'm saying is the ingredient that we're missing in the division is a named gatekeeper. And Keith Thurman can provide that because for whatever reason, publications have Keith Thurman number 10 in the top 10 in the division, anywhere from 6 to 7 in the division right now. So if he's going to be there, he has to earn that status. And one way he can earn that status, he's not going to get Crawford or Spence. He's not. All right. Whether we see Ugas versus Thurman, maybe Ugas will want to come back with a fight like that. I'd be okay with that fight. But what I'd rather see is Keith Thurman offer gatekeeper services to young, up and coming fighters like a Boots Ennis. Conor Ben wants to fight. Conor Ben wants to fight Keith Thurman. Why not do that? I'd love to see that fight. There's another one right here. Mikey Garcia is a perfect gatekeeper if he can be motivated to mail it in for an easy payday. He is also a great gatekeeper, and he's coming off of a loss. So he's not, Mikey Garcia is not who he was at all. All right. It's really puzzling. The Mikey Garcia career arc is puzzling. It's puzzling. Just thinking about it is puzzling, but he does offer himself as a name at 147 if he wants to come back. And I don't want to see these fights like Mikey Garcia as an A side against an obscure fighter. I don't want to see Mikey Garcia versus Keith Thurman. I don't want to see Mikey Garcia versus anybody like that. I want to see Mikey Garcia against a top. These guys need people to fight if they're not going to fight each other. But what I would love to see is Virgil Ortiz versus Boots Ennis, but I keep being told by boxing fans that that's not possible, right? But Stanionis and Butsayev just did it. Why not? Looking at the 47 division, who can Thurman actually beat? I don't see a winning path for him, unfortunately. I agree. I don't see him beating Stanionis. I don't see him beating Conor Ben. I don't see him beating Virgil Ortiz. I definitely don't see him beating Boots Ennis. I don't even see him beating a Cody Crowley. Who's he going to beat? And I think that's the problem. Like, they don't have that faith in him to fight these guys. Right? But you would at least like to see him do it, and he would be paid handsomely to do it. So why not? But I guess they don't have that faith in him. His team. Keith has been living off of 2016, 2017 too long. That's what I'm saying, man. It's and not only that, I understand why he does, because he's still a top 10 in these publications. So it sets a precedent that it's okay to go away for 5 years and not have a big victory, and you're still top 10 in your division. Why? He's 0-1 in legit welterweight battles the past 5 years, but he's still top 10 in the welterweight division. Mikey should be no weight and call it a career. He doesn't have the desire to fight anymore. And that's what I saw in his last fight. He just didn't seem to be there with his head, right? He's never had an issue with skill, but 147, his skill didn't. First of all, he didn't have the dedication at 147, but his skill didn't match. His skill didn't show as much as he moved up in weight. 33, 34 just came back. He ain't going to be around much longer. And that's what I'm saying, man. Get your cash out. Get your money. Thurman will go down in history as a what if. I also agree with that. Keith Thurman's still living off the money he made on the Pacquiao fight. Thurman reminds me of David Hay, always hurt and injury prone. Mikey been a welterweight for the past 3 years. Mikey could serve as a gatekeeper opponent. Mikey natural weight ain't 147. Pacquiao. Either the thought of Manny giving any of those guys a shot makes me want to throw up. Yeah, and look, there's going to be, and I'm of that thought too. I want to see Pacquiao ride off into the sunset, right? Enjoy his legacy and what he's done as a fighter. He deserves that. All I'm saying is, realistically, if we look at boxing history, guys who go off and do something and it's not successful, a lot of them end up coming back. And this is what I'm talking about here, is Pacquiao lost his election and he came in a distant third. He wasn't even close to winning. So if politics was in his future and politics isn't the present, what's he doing in the present? I'm sure he's got other things going for him, right? I'm sure he can come up with other things. I'm sure he has a lot of nonprofits, charitable work, all this stuff. But a lot of guys, when they're not successful in what they do right after boxing, and the money's calling in boxing, they come back, if we're being realistic. But I think it's a 50-50 shot. And I would be happy either way. I'd be happy to see him ride off into the sunset. But also, as a Pacquiao fan, there's that part of me that wants to see him come back out again, right? And what if What if he beats one of these young guys? Pacquiao's too busy making it rain in the Philippines, possibly. And once again, appreciate this super chat, Chauncey. Pearls, AB in 2012 was a big deal. Now 22, 32, 33, he's faded. And I agree with that. I've always felt that Broner was overrated, overvalued. I've always been on that wave, but he's a name. And he would give you hype before the fight. He knows how to build up a fight. He is a strong B-side, always will be. He'll always be a strong B-side. So he's another guy I throw out there as a possible gatekeeper at 147 to provide services for young fighters. It's the ingredient that's missing in the 147 landscape right now. And somebody needs to fill that void. And one of these guys can make a come up off of filling that void. If you're going to provide a service, you look for the void, you look for the vacuum. And Thurman, Broner, Danny Garcia is another name we haven't mentioned, can provide that service. Danny Garcia has been talking about going to 154 for a while, but he wouldn't have success at 154 if we're being honest, if you look at the top of 154. And he's been questioned about fighting guys at the top of 154, and he always finds an excuse as to why that wouldn't be a good idea. So what's the plan? What's the plan? If 154 is too much for him, stick around at 147 and fill that void, fill that vacuum, make some money doing it. AB got too much fat, too fast. Now he's been shriveled up. Just found challenge. Shout out Andre Lewis. Make sure to hit that sub button, man. I appreciate that. Ugas took some punishment. He might not be the same. Yeah, that's always a likelihood. That's always a possibility. And he took a beating against Spence. Took quite the beating. Anytime you have an orbital bone injury, it always gets dicey after that, right? So I hope we see Ugas back. I've always liked Ugas. He's one of those guys who put together a nice 6-year run, much like Jermell Charlo I was just talking about, who put together a beautiful 5-year run of tough competition. Ugas was a guy that guys didn't really want to fight, but he got his mandatory shot finally and took advantage of it and ran with it and did a good job. So props to Ugas. I hope he gets more shots, and I think he will, because I think he's a guy that these other young fighters at 147 will want to fight in order to get a name on their resume. But he's not quite gatekeeper yet, man. That guy is still close to his prime, if not in it. Just suffered his first defeat in a while. So props to Ugas. Keith versus Errol was a hot fight in 2015, 2016. Yes, it was. And once again, it's one of those fights at 147 that never materialized. And once again, it's why I bring up this scenario in which when I look at the landscape at the top 10 right now at 147, it sort of mirrors that landscape of young, rich, talent-rich guys who will somehow find a way to avoid each other because it doesn't make sense for them to fight each other at this point in their career. This is what I'm hearing. I'm paraphrasing now. It doesn't make sense for Boots and Virgil to fight each other at this point in their career, right? They're risking too much. There's not enough reward for that. I hate hearing stuff like that. It doesn't make sense for Conor Benn to fight Virgil Ortiz. It doesn't make sense for Cody Crowley to fight Boots Ennis. It doesn't make sense for any of these guys to fight Stanionis because Stanionis is too dangerous. You hear stuff like this, and boxing fans, I've said it multiple times, boxing fans have been programmed to speak like managers and promoters and network execs, and I hear it all too often. Start speaking like a boxing fan. Just say, I want to see these fights, and these fights should be able to be made. I'm hearing too many people talk like promoters and managers, and it's frustrating. Let the promoters and managers and boxing execs, network execs speak like that. Let them speak like suits. We speak like boxing fans, and we demand these fights. And we say that these fights should materialize. That's how we should be speaking as boxing fans. But we're not, because we've been programmed. These fights should happen. They should develop. But if they're not, if we're looking at this realistically and these guys aren't going to fight each other, we need a gatekeeper. Conor Benn is way too aggressive. He's going to walk into something and be stopped. Someone like Josito Lopez is a good gatekeeper. He'll give everyone hell at 147. I think Josito Lopez is on his way out after his last fight. And I've never seen Lopez as like a legit 147-pound threat. And he's not as big of a name as the guys we're talking about. So yeah, gatekeeper, possibly. Possibly you're right. That could be another name to throw out there. But I'm speaking more in terms of bigger named guys. And Thurman has a big name. Danny Garcia has a big name. Adrian Broner has a big name. Whether they did anything inside the ring to deserve it or not, big names. Big names. I think Thurman could beat Crowley, possibly. Crowley, I would say, out of all the names I've mentioned, if I'm ranking all the young talent coming up in the division, guys close to entering their prime, I would say Boots Ennis, Virgil Ortiz. I would say Stanionis third right now. I would say Connor Ben fourth. I like all four of those guys, by the way. Love them as a boxing fan. And then I would say Crowley number five out of all those guys. I would say he's the weakest out of all those guys if I'm ranking him. Shout out Bruce Gass. Been on some podcasts, some roundtables with him. Good dude there. Shout out to him. Go check out his channel. Shout out Team Batman Boxing, who's been leaving comments. You're absolutely right, bro. These fans trying to act like they know what's going on behind the scenes, and that's the problem today. And I've said this all the time, man. Like a lot of these channels, publications talk too much, and there's not a problem, and I'm not trying to be critical, but there's no issue speaking in terms of economics, and because it's all part of the sport. But when it starts to heavily outweigh the sport, this at some point has to resemble a sport, and it has been recently, which is good. You're seeing more unifications, you're seeing more undisputeds, you're seeing more people follow that for sanctioning body blueprint in order to make top fights with each other, unifications, undisputeds. We're seeing that more than ever right now in the four belt era. So that's good. That's good. However, it still needs to resemble even more so a sport to attract eyes and to keep people here and to make this a sustainable sport. I still need to see more of that. And when I hear things like, oh, this guy can't fight this guy because of A, B, C, D, E. I just say, no, man, like that should be realistic. Boots Ennis versus Virgil Ortiz should be realistic. It should be. Like Munguia against anybody not named Jimmy Kelly should be realistic. You can't tell me it's not. You can't tell me these top five guys in the middleweight division, other than Golovkin and Murata, shouldn't be fighting each other. You can't tell me that David Benavidez should be fighting Lemieux this weekend. Benavidez is a minus 2,000 favorite. It just shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen. And if it's happening, if you're fighting that infrequently, like a David Benavidez, and you're fighting guys of that level, it's unacceptable. And you shouldn't be crying about not getting this fight and that fight and that fight, especially if you've given up your belts from what you've done in the past. Just don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear the small violin come out. When someone says there's too much risk and low reward, not for the winner for the fight, the winner will get tons of recognition. Bingo. Bingo. And what they say is Virgil Ortiz, let me give you an example. Virgil Ortiz and Boots Ennis shouldn't fight each other because they look at it differently. They look at it, and this is exactly what I'm saying. I'm glad you put this comment. Glad you put this comment. Because they always look at it as glass half empty, because that's how the manager, promoter, network exec looks at it. They look at it as, what if my fighter loses? As Dana White always says about boxing, they treat every big fight like a going out of business sale. So what if Virgil Ortiz loses to Boots Ennis? What happens to his career? What if he's damaged? What if he's never the same? They look at it pessimistic. And we can't look at that as boxing fans. We have to treat the sport above any individual fighter. So if Virgil Ortiz loses to Boots Ennis, that's got nothing to do with me as a boxing fan. I'm looking at it as I just got a good fight. I just got a quality fight. I just got a fight between two top 5 welterweights. That's a win for me. And by the way, both fighters got paid handsomely in the process. And by the way, I don't treat L's the way these guys do. A guy loses a fight, guess what? I'm still praising him. Guess what? I still want to see him fight as long as he fought top guys. Oscar Valdez, guess what? He fights again. I'm on my couch watching, even though he just lost to Shakur. Canelo just lost to Bivol. Guess what? It's all the same to me because Canelo is still fighting top competition. Canelo is still taking risks. So I still view Canelo the same. Ugas loses to Spence. I'm not throwing Ugas away. Castaño loses to Jermell Charlo. Guess what? Still giving props to Castaño. Fought two great fights against Charlo. He just came up short. But guess what? Castaño fights again. I still want to see it. He's still giving me what I asked for as a boxing fan, and that's fighting top competition. But in closing, social media and direct access to the athletes has made fans more attached to them, so the idea of seeing the sport out of fighters' perspective is more prevalent. That's another good point. Jimmy Kelly is worse than an unknown. I know him and know he belongs nowhere near a Munguia fight, even 4 years ago, let alone now. Yeah, Jimmy Kelly, that's a bad look. When they said Jimmy Kelly, I thought that was the retired Hall of Fame quarterback from the Buffalo Bills, but it's a fighter. And by the way, we'll be speaking a lot about another guy who doesn't belong in a big fight next week, and that's Rolly Romero. Believe me, we'll be talking a lot about that next week. But in conclusion, we need gatekeeper opponents, solidified big name gatekeeper opponents at 147. That's what's missing. That's what's missing in the ingredient at 147. If you look at the top 10 in the division, and no, that's what. And please stop trolling because I know that's not G Funky, but that's what I'm saying, man. So you have to get that key ingredient at 147. 147 has always been a talent-rich division, and it gives us a mixture of everything. The welterweight division always gives us a mixture of everything: talent, speed, skill, quickness, athleticism, and it gives us great fights from top to bottom because it gives you a mixture of knockouts. It gives you a mixture of boxing skill as well. It gives you great 12-round battles, but it also gives you knockouts. So it always needs a bit of everything. And right now, what it's missing, if I look at 1 through 10, is that big name R2 gatekeeper opponents. On that note, I'm out. God bless y'all. Peace.